One of the most impressive things a band can do is to continue to improve their quality of music and not put out the same album repeatedly. Rock, metal, alternative, these genres are filled with bands who rely on one sound, but there are many groups who have learned how to venture into something different and prove their creativity. This list looks at 10 bands that evolved after their debut albums.
Rules for the list. This is not a top 10, no ranking, just a list. I'm only including bands that have at least 4 albums in their discography. It's not much of an evolution if the band only has 1 or 2 albums for their name. Finally, I'm focusing on groups that are mostly still active right now. That's just to help narrow it down and keep things a bit more current. You know how these videos work, let's get to it.
Shinedown does not get enough credit for how far the band has come from the mid-2000s with a song like 45, where I think many people thought it would be another singles-based band that radio was already flooded with at the time. When Zach Myers joined Brent Smith a few years later after Leave a Whisper debuted, the potential of the group increased. This band proved many people wrong.
When I did a discography tier list video on Shinedown a few years ago, it reminded me how far Shinedown has come after Leave a Whisper. When The Sound of Madness arrived, it did a big step up in many different forms, including songwriting and presentation, leading to years after that with Attention and Planet Zero having full concepts. Shinedown tries to have variety in their tone while sticking with the formats mainstream loves, and then on the albums you hear more variety in style, which I think should be commended. That's what separates Shinedown from the butt rock bands that came out of the 2000s. After a few albums, the group went from standard rock band to a group worth following to see what happens next. Shinedown didn't rest on their laurels of the song 45 and wanted to do more.
Another band in similar fashion is Chevelle, who after their debut, I don't think many within the industry, mainstream, or public had much vision for what the group was going to be. Point number 1 was released to little fanfare in 1999. It wasn't until the new century that radio started blasting singles, and following Wonder What's Next came Chevelle experimenting with how to structure an album.
Many of you probably didn't even know Chevelle had an album before Wonder What's Next. Many more people didn't even know Chevelle had been around for over 20 years, and each album following always feels like the Loeffler family were not going to make standard radio rock format songs. As time has gone on, that's been more established. Think about the 2010s output like La Gargola and The North Corridor. When you hear the later albums, they are much deeper in story and tone than Chevelle's early output. Even the singles have a distinct writing style and flow to them. Last year, Chevelle said they might be hanging it up for a bit if the latest album Near Tias didn't do well, and it did just fine, and Chevelle is continuing on. It's not just an album title, but also an expression of I wonder what's next for Chevelle, because they are still pushing themselves to try and break their own mold.
Deathcore to metalcore to standard rock to electronic experimentation. Bring Me the Horizon has made massive changes since the 2000s, and it feels with that almost every album has come some type of venture slightly out of their comfort zone. Those small steps from the beginning have landed the Sheffield group a huge distance to where the band currently is.
Go all the way back to 2006 with Count Your Blessings and see how much happened from Suicide Season and There Is a Hell, and think about how much has happened since then. Even Sempiternal was a shift from Suicide Season. That's The Spirit is different than that. And now we have more amazing collaborations on Posthuman and more collaborations coming. Jordan Fish has helped bring Ali Sykes and company to another level of creativity and sound that I don't think Bring Me the Horizon would have reached without him. Even if I haven't loved everything that has come from the group, what I have loved I feel is amazing, including material in the 2020s. We already know there will be more EPs in the Posthuman series, and I wouldn't be surprised if those releases ventured farther into new styles from what the band has done before.
Having a straightforward alternative rock album as your debut is by no means a bad thing, and sometimes the debut is more important for showcasing the potential. Muse have evolved leaps and bounds from a straightforward alt-rock group on Showbiz in 1999 to the massive, sprawling electronic rock outfit for decades shows just how far Muse has come.
Absolution and Black Holes and Revelations are 2 of the best rock albums of the 2000s, and to think that both of those albums came less than 7 years after Muse's debut Showbiz is a huge testament to a band realizing their potential and running with it. In the late 90s, there were a million bands that sounded like what Showbiz had, and Muse proved they were much more than what those million bands had to offer. It just took time and an entry point to get started. A band can change and add more, but only after you actually start. I get that not everyone has loved the latter output from Muse. I'm in that group as well, but at no point can I deny just how much Muse has grown and evolved over the years. Everything from instrument focus to live stage spectacles has become enormous, and it started from a much smaller scope.
When I posted the question on the YouTube community page asking for suggestions, AFI kept coming up, and the more I thought about it, the more I understood. AFI's career has been wild with plenty of subgenre change-ups going through, and back to answer that and stay fashionable in 1995. AFI is still putting out music, and through the ups and downs, hits and misses, AFI has never stopped changing.
When you hear the 90s output of AFI and then think about how that group would eventually release Sing the Sorrow, you see how far AFI has come. Hardcore punk to emo to many other styles after the early 2000s, when they got the massive attention the band never once said, okay, this style worked, let's double down on it. AFI wanted to keep expanding. Jade said in an interview that every time we do something, I have to judge it on its own merits. Some fans are going to judge a new album or a new song based on what's come before, but as artists, we can't do that because it would only hinder our creativity. For having the same lineup for over 20 years, along with that, it shows how dedicated Davey Havok, Adam Carson, and everyone involved are making AFI and have many styles and not holding back either. Each album and performance having its own new identity. That's an admirable goal for bands.
One of the impressive things about Incubus is how they realized that the sound that suited them was not their strongest suit at the time, but they were able to figure out how to make their sound work going in a different direction. Fungus Among Us in 1995 was much more funk rock and chaotic based. That was a sound that was fading in popularity. Incubus evolved when the band tried to make music that was natural to them.
I still think Science from 1997 is a lot of fun, but when the band released Make Yourself, they were launched into the stratosphere. It was a different take in the nu metal genre, with much cleaner singing and hooks that went into mainstream. That led to Morning View, which continued to carry the group, and the tone of the band was refined. I don't think Incubus was bad at the funk style, but the band had so much more to offer that they would not have been displayed if they didn't change. The group's original bassist, Dirk Lance, was a powerhouse that added a strong identity to the group from the 90s to the mid-2000s, and you could hear it prominently in that evolution as well. Whether it's Make Yourself, Morning View, or the later albums like 8 in 2017, which many people have mixed feelings on, you can still hear how far Incubus has come since Fungus Funk.
There are some Deftones fans that may argue this, but I truly don't see how anyone can ignore how much the group has grown in sound since Adrenaline in 1995. Think about how much more refined and impressive Chino's voice has become, and think about how much more atmospheric and detailed each album has been since. I see tons of evolution in Deftones through the music.
Even the jump from Around the Fur to White Pony was a massive boost in writing and creativity from Deftones. The entries in the 2000s also have a different feel and identity than the 2010s output, leading to Ohms in 2020. You hear different eras of Deftones when listening to a specific album, and the music still sounds fresh. It's hard to explain, but it's true. Where Adrenaline and Around the Fur, which are solid, not talking down about them, they both aren't as enormous and atmospheric as later albums that Deftones have been known to deliver. I don't think the band writes in single song format anymore. They try to make something cohesive and connecting. That's been heard since Diamond Eyes. I now wait for 90s Deftones fans to angrily comment and twist my words around what I said about those albums. Some bands evolve, but YouTube commenters never will.
It's been almost 30 years since Tool released Undertow in 1993. Only 5 full LP albums have been released under the Tool banner, and as original and unorthodox Undertow was in the early 90s, Tool continued to change. Maynard James Keenan became more focused and calculated, and the band became somehow more talented with their instruments. Each album after is proof in different ways.
One of the best examples would be to look at the difference between Lateralis and Undertow. Look at the difference between Fear Inoculum and Lateralis. Even the long jam session style from Fear Inoculus to 10,000 Days. You cannot predict how each Tool album will be structured, but you know it will not be phoned in. With Tool, it's not so much evolution in the craft, but evolution in how to make an album and not settling for making Lateralis Part 2. The time and dedication to make endless time signatures flow together alone is difficult, but that's what makes Tool so enjoyable. Songwriting evolved, sequences evolved, Tool even matured, kind of. I mean, the music has matured. Maynard is still a teenager at heart, I think, and loves his shenanigans, but the music in Tool has steered less away from that over time, and I'm positive Tool will continue to evolve as well.
Not only is Judas Priest still active and the group working on new music after 50 years in the game, but one of the greatest metal bands ever is greatly removed from their origin. Long before being a figurehead in metal clad in leather, Judas Priest was rocking bell-bottoms and flowing shirts as a standard 70s rock band.
Think how far Judas Priest leaned into metal after the debut in 1974. The evolution came from a passion for heavy music and realizing the potential in Rob Halford and company. Even with all the changes over the decades, Judas Priest is synonymous with metal, and it did not start that way. Rock-a-Rolla is not some awful album either, it's not. The debut album flopped hard though, and the evolution of Judas Priest came over time, and you see the band move from the 70s style becoming darker and more iconic. KK Downing said that the group had an identity crisis in the beginning, but when they found out what Judas Priest was best at, it became legendary. Heavy metal had another figurehead, and Judas Priest is still touring heavily and making new music. Over 50 years, and still putting other bands to shame.
Radiohead might be one of the best examples who went far beyond their entry point in music. In 1993, deep in the alternative explosion, came a band stepping forward from after-class sessions with a debut in Pablo Honey. Less than 5 years later, Radiohead would take a massive step forward with album writing, completely abandoning the radio format and taking the group to a new level.
When OK Computer came out, it was deemed as not commercial enough, and the industry thought it would be difficult to sell. The industry was wrong. That opened the floodgates on what Tom York and company knew they would create, while keeping the original fanbase who heard Creep on the radio happy. Radiohead has gone out of their way to distance themselves from the song Creep and wanted to be known as the group who made massive albums like Kid A and Hail to the Thief and In Rainbows. The band's evolution was deliberate, and it intended to prove how much Radiohead has created. From potential alternative radio singles to household name with earth-stopping momentum every time the band releases a new album, Radiohead is a fantastic example of how you can continue to grow as musicians and expand what you are capable of making. Not bad for a group that used to only play on a Friday. And that was a look at 10 bands that evolved after their debut album. Know of another band that has changed their sound since their first release? There are many out there. Leave a comment, let everyone know. Big thanks to my patrons and special thanks to Chris Noman and Dom Noble. You can have a say in upcoming videos, get weekly new music playlists, and see videos early by supporting Rocked on Patreon. Click on the link in the video description for more info on helping the channel. Please subscribe and ring the bell to get notified on upcoming videos, and you can keep up to date with Rocked on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm debating the idea of making a follow-up video about bands who never changed their sound since the band's debut, but that might make for a lot of butthurt fans of certain groups. I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in seeing that.